Welcome everyone to the Co-Creators Convergence Thursday night Creator Convos. I'm Noelle Marshall, and I'm sorry to tell you that my beloved Bob Warner, I've got him on other duties tonight. So I'm flying solo, but I am here with my BFF, Kathy Mason. So everybody, and my other BFF is Kelvin. What a guy. I just love him. So happy to have you all here. And we're going to be sharing this on Facebook. So if you happen to see it on the Co-Creators Facebook page, be sure to share it out now or later. It's all good. So we're going to start in just a minute. And I'm welcome. I see some names that I don't recognize. So before we begin, I want to tell you a little bit about the Co-Creators Convergence. So just please stand by. So that is a little bit about the Co-Creators Convergence. So here I am again with my friend Kathy Mason, who brings us the cream of the crop. And she is bringing us Kelvin Chin. And we've had him on. This guy is so diversified, he can talk about just about anything. Before we begin, I do want to tell you a little bit about Kathy Mason. Kathy is an Amazon best-selling author, speaker, host of the show Conscious Business Zone, an online sales specialist who works with conscious companies to help them grow. She is a psychic and intuitive and can see your soul mission and help you create that vision now. Through her company, Mason Works Marketing, she lovingly supports her clients as a seasoned interactive strategy coach and implementer. And she does it all: digital platforms, internet, TV, and social networks.
etc., etc., etc.
Cause marketing expert. She is a business shaman. So look her up. You got a book you need to get out there. Marketing. She's a lady to call. And that's Kathy Mason at masonworksmarketing.com. So I'm going to go quiet now, and I'm going to turn it over to Kathy.
Thank you so much. And I am so excited. What we're going to do first is, before I introduce Kel, I'm going to start with a opening centering that is part of Saint Germain's. It's one of the decrees. And basically what we're doing is we're going to activate the violet flame around your body so that you can feel comfortable and clear and everything. So it's from this book, the I Am Decrees, book 1. And I'm just going to read the first one. And hopefully you'll feel a lot of weight come off of you as we start this. Violet flame from the central sun, violet flame from the central sun, violet flame from the central sun, in, through, and around, all under this radiation, this instant and forever descend. Descend, descend, descend. Defend, defend, defend. Command, command, command. I am, I am, I am. Control, control, control. Take hold, take hold, take hold. Unfold, unfold, unfold. Our victory, victory, hold. Expand, expand, expand. Our freedom now demand. In thee we ever stand. I am, I am, I am. I am, I am, I am. I am, I am, I am. Forevermore, I am the only acting presence, which right now sweeps into the physical octave, swift as a flash, perfect as the ascended masters see it. And I demand this manifest, manifest, manifest in all our victory, victory, victory attained right now. I expect this manifest, manifest, manifest in all our victory, victory, victory attained right now. I am this manifest, manifest, manifest in all our victory, victory, victory attained right now. Almighty I am, Almighty I am, Almighty I am. So hopefully you feel that your field has been cleared and your bright light that is your soul is now available and shiny for you and everyone else in this group, because we're going to be exploring a different way of thinking about this reality and about your soul, really, tonight. So I am so proud to introduce my friend and teacher, Kelvin Chin. He's a life after life expert whose past life memories reach back 6,000 years. And today we're going to talk about his brand new book, which I have all these post-it notes on, because I always do that with all of Kelvin's books. His new book called Life After Afterlife. And I love this book. So I want to make sure you understand. I want to also explain my experience with Kelvin so you understand how grounded he really is, so that when you hear some of these stories that he's going to share tonight about his life, his past lives, and who he's been and the experiences he's had, that you know that he really is a very grounded teacher in this lifetime. I've taken 2 classes from him. One was on overcoming our fear of death. And it's a wonderful class that actually refers to some of these stories if you take his class, as well as I took a class on meditation, because Kelvin is an expert at meditation, and we'll dive into that a little bit more. He's also the executive director and founder of both the Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundation and the nonprofit Turning Within, which is .org, which is part of this work as well. And he's taught seminars worldwide. He brings so much clarity and a kind of grounded, practical knowledge to this expanded thought and expanded availability that we all have, that I think is part of the remedy for the confusion and the fear that so many people are in right now. So Kelvin, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Good to see you again, Kathy.
Yes, yes.
Everybody, yeah.
Yeah. So Kelvin, as I said, I took a class. I want to make sure people understand a little bit about your background. I took a meditation class from you that was so profound and so good. I've taken so many classes before and done a lot of guided meditations, but your class was profoundly strong and made the expanded space of awareness available to me. Like it was very rare that I would be able to get into that state, and I can get into it now at a snap of a finger. Could you explain a little bit about your background in learning and teaching meditation so people understand why you're such a master at it?
Yeah, well, first of all, we'll go big picture and then I'll talk about this lifetime. I've been practicing various forms of meditation for several thousand years that I'm aware of anyway. I've have lifetimes as a Buddhist monk, several lifetimes, et cetera, et cetera. This lifetime, I learned to meditate when I was a teenager. So I was very, very stressed out. That's why I learned. I did not know what spirituality was this lifetime when I was a teenager. Notwithstanding all the experiences you'll hear me touch on tonight in our discussion, when I grew up in a science household. So my parents were scientists. I had a science background. I was very science-oriented, rational thinking, and I take that rational, logical thinking to my current work in spirituality. But back then, you know, if you asked me spirituality, I would have taken the first 5 or 6 letters of spirit, and I would have thought, ghosts? What are you talking about? Or I would have thought, you're talking about religion. You know, I grew up going to Protestant church, and just because my parents said I had to, and you know, that's what I thought spirituality was, and I wasn't really into it, any of that. And so I learned meditation purely for stress reasons, stress reduction. I was very anxious. I learned I did a survey first of a bunch of different kinds of courses of meditation, and I looked into this one, I looked into that one. Back then in 1970, a lot of these gurus or their teachers were circulating around college campuses. Those of you who are old enough to remember, they did that, and they would come and try to get new students. And so I sat in on a number of them, and I thought, oh, I didn't want to shave my head. I shaved my head now. I had long hair down. I had long hair down to my shoulders, part in the middle. You can go on my Facebook if you really want to see what I look like then. And long hair down here. And I didn't want to change my lifestyle, is the point, you know, because a lot of them required that. Or if they didn't require it, it was like better if you did that. You know, you get more out of it if you kind of wore the beads and all this stuff. And that wasn't my thing. I was a pre-med. I was a science major at the time. Anyway, so I learned TM, Transcendental Meditation. They talked about research in terms of meditation, physiology. And I thought, what? And so coincidentally, you know, just 6-8 months later, I was in the experiments of this cardiologist who was a Harvard Medical School professor. So this was 1970, 71, 72. And I studied personally with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in 1971 and 1973. I was an international leader in his TM organization. You may have heard of that, Transcendental Meditation. He taught the Beatles to meditate and so forth. So I was part of that organization for about 10 years. They went off in this direction. I said, see you later. And I went off in that. You know, I continued focusing on meditation. They got into a lot of other things. And that's when I started opening up in the mid 1970s to my past lives and so forth. That's when I started having what I would call spiritual experiences. Now, you might call what I was having before then, before my past life memories, spiritual experiences, where I was opening up to myself, and I was, as Kathy kind of alluded to, I was opening up and expanding my conscious capacity of my mind, but it seemed very normal to me. So I didn't think of that even as spiritual. I thought of it as just normal. It's like, oh, my mind is experiencing something different, but it's still me. And that's how I languaged it in my rational kind of mind at the time. But that's what kind of, I got dipped my toe back into, you could say, the spiritual world that way.
Well, you just sort of quickly went through the role that you had, which was a leadership role with Maharishi's group internationally, where you were weren't you part of Southeast Asia?
Yeah, I was the national leader of his organization in Hong Kong.
At what, 20 years old?
I was 22, 23. I coordinated
Wow.
8
Wow.
countries.
So that shows the kind of capacity that you have to lead and that you're a straight shooter and a clear thinker, because you have to have been, even at that young age, you had to demonstrate the fact that you could make good decisions.
Yeah, I was negotiating with ministers of countries then in
Wow.
Korea and Hong Kong. Hong Kong was a British Crown colony then, but it had its own ministers, Minister of Education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was 22, 23 years old, and I was negotiating deals with them in order to teach in certain.
Wow. Wow. So that I just wanted to make sure everyone got the wow that I just got, and I want to share, because seriously, when you don't meet that many people that are truly in service like this. I mean, I met Kelvin because I'm a volunteer for the IONS group, which is the International Association for Near-Death Studies. And he's given presentations and been part of the speakers, the higher level speakers at their events. And the reason I just right away recognized the gift that he is, the generosity and the compassion that he has for others, that really helps people. Because when people have had a near-death experience or they've lost a loved one, they are in an altered traumatic state, and they are not able to really, it's dissociative. They can't necessarily push through the trauma to function totally. They may be so altered that they close down totally. And so what Kelvin has done with his nonprofits and his work through IONS and other organizations is he's been there for people. And Kelvin, why don't you explain a little bit about that? Because I think people have to understand your generosity with this, that you're really in service without the accolades. I know you're going to turn red and blush a little, but oh well.
Yeah. So so why do I do what I do in the way that Kathy describes? I do it because my self-interest is to make myself happy, and it makes me happy to help other people in this way. So you could say I have a self-interest in it. It's not a selfish self-interest, but it's self-interested. And I think we're all self-interested. And that's how I choose to express my love and my love for others and myself, quite frankly, to feed because it feeds me by giving to people in this way. I think of giving and taking. I think, if we are giving more than we're taking, I think that we're in a good place. And yes. I think the world was if you just take a very simplistic view of this, very simple view, and distill it down to the essence, giving more than we're taking. And there's nothing wrong with taking, but give more than we take. I think if everybody just kind of used that simple metric, wouldn't it be an amazing place? So I give away, a lot of my services for free in various ways. One of the things I do is a free phone call with anybody in the world. I have clients now in 64 countries. And I do a phone call or a Zoom or a WhatsApp call with somebody internationally, and or here in the United States, of course. I'm in Los Angeles, but anywhere in the world for about anything that I do for free. I give a free initial session, and then I teach classes and so forth, and I charge a fee, but whatever the fee is, I never, ever turn anybody away for financial reasons. And that means what it says. Now, two things on that. I am needs-based. If somebody needs my help, I will help them. But I do not persuade people to work with me. If somebody's interested in working with me, great, and they have a need, I will help them, and the finances are never a barrier. But I will turn somebody away if they're not there in good faith. I don't know if it's ever happened, but in theory, I would.
Yeah.
In theory, I would.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you a context where it would happen, and it has happened over my 50 years teaching, is if somebody comes to me, and it's happened with some parents, for example, they say, I want my child to learn meditation because it's helped me so much. I want you to teach my child. And they said, well, I'm only going to teach your child if your child wants to
That's
learn.
right.
I will not teach your child because you think it's good for your child and you're telling them they have to do it.
Right.
So that's an example. I've
Right.
done turned that
Right.
away. Yeah.
Well, okay, so I took, as I said, I took the meditation class, which I was shocked how easy it was, how you didn't have to wear special clothes or jewelry to do it, which isn't the norm with most practices, and how easily it's a tool in my toolkit now. That I can pull out anywhere. I can pull it out in the grocery store line as I'm waiting. I can pull it out in my car if I need to, to cool my jets. I mean, that's one thing. So you have to know that Kelvin, since he was in his early 20s, has been able to experience life in a much more expanded way than most people. And then he actually, because of his affiliation with the TM group, started to realize during some of his meditation and Kundalini experiences about some of his past lives that are in this wonderful book. So Kelvin, why don't we start with that? Because I just think it's fascinating learning some of the stories of how you were able to pinpoint and know with definitively about these past lives.
Yeah, and the thing is, the knowing that comes along with this is not necessarily immediate. Sometimes it's piecemeal. Very often, for me anyway, it's been piecemeal over long periods of time. And when you read that, you can see that in the book, how, well, I get a piece of this memory here, and I get another piece over here, and another piece over here. And over many decades, it may come together and kind of start making sense and start teaching me more about who I am, which is the way I look at all of these memories anyway. How can it teach me more about who I am? But yeah, the learning to meditate with Maharishi and studying with him and teaching, in the 1970s definitely helped open me up. And so I think it definitely accelerated my opening to my memories, for sure. People ask me sometimes, is it absolutely necessary that you meditate? No, nothing's absolutely necessary. I mean, I have students who haven't meditated, and then they've had spontaneous past life memory pop up. It can happen, but can it accelerate? I think so. And that's what happened with me. I was just minding my own business. Well, actually what happened initially was I had a dream, right? And I didn't even know the dream had anything to do with anything other than it was a bad dream. It was a nightmare. I was really upset. But then about 6 or 8 months later, I was on one of these advanced TM teacher courses. It was a group of TM teachers, 75 of us, in a hotel where I was, and there were, I don't know how many other hundreds of, groups of people there were, groups of hundreds of people around. There were maybe 10 groups or 20 groups or whatever in Switzerland at the time. But in my hotel, there were 75 of us, and we would do group meditations twice a day, and then we would meditate all day for 2 months every day. And we would meditate in our rooms alone in between. But we had group meditations, and as Kathy alluded to, we were doing what most people you would consider Kundalini energy moving exercises. We didn't call it that, but that's what it was. And in the groups. And so we would sit there, and people start getting energy rushes. They start wiggling around like this. And some people were like hopping, they look like frogs hopping across the foam mattresses that we had in the big room and the floor. But what happened to me was I spontaneously, during one meditation, and then turns out every subsequent meditation for several months, I flipped over on my back, and in other words, my feet went over this way, and I was sitting down, and I was feet behind me, kind of in that yoga position. They call it the plow, I think. And I was reliving being crucified. It was very unpleasant, as you can imagine. Physically, I had the physical experience. I had the emotional pain and suffering and really and mental anguish. And it was very unpleasant, but I was reliving this experience energetically, memory, and then I started having more visuals of it, etc., every time. And but I didn't know who I was or anything other than this was obviously an old experience. I knew I was being crucified. And then I went out for a walk, and my friend George and I went for a walk together after lunch. That's when I mentioned to him that I had had a dream 6 or 8 months earlier, and he described the dream to me. I told him I had an upsetting dream. I think that's all I said to him, something like that. He went through, he said, this is what you were wearing, this is where you were on the side of the road, you were crying all night, and this, that, and the other thing. And it blew me away. And I said, how'd you know that? He said, because I found you 2,000 years ago. So that's how that started opening up. Yeah.
Wow, wow, wow. So I thank you for doing that. Now, do you want to disclose who that was? Who you were in that lifetime?
Okay, so he said to me, he said, you don't know who you were? I said, no, what are you talking about? And he said, well, you've been saying and telling me and other people, after we finished the group meditations for the last couple of weeks, you've been flipping over in your back, and you keep saying that you feel like you're being crucified and you're upside down being crucified and all this. And he said, you don't know who was crucified upside down? And I said, no. So you got to understand that as I said, I grew up Protestant, went to Sunday school, didn't really pay attention. I thought that, it's interesting stories in the Bible and stuff, but I just thought there's stories and so forth. George, on the other hand, he was a altar boy since 8 years old, went to Catholic schools his whole, childhood and through high school and so forth. And we met at Dartmouth College together and became friends. So he said, oh, well, you don't know who was crucified upside down? Simon Peter. Peter was crucified upside down. So that's when those memories started opening up in me. And then I started having memories of being with Jesus and so forth, and eating and laughing and sitting around the campfire and different, personal experiences. Yeah.
Wow. So inside of this wonderful book is a map of all the timeline of Kelvin's past lives, which started 400 BC and go to now. Actually, you don't have now, but we know who you are now. We have the one right before this. But and you start with being a Sumerian businessman, and each one of these chapters details whatever memories you have, whether they're a lot or a little, inside the book. So for people that want to understand what we're talking about without seeing the book, I recommend all of Kelvin's books. They're very easy reads. You can hear how clearly he speaks. It's like he's speaking to you as you're reading the books. It's wonderful.
And the reason that is, Kathy, is because the way I write the books is by speaking them.
Yes.
Then I transcribe them. So people will say, it sounds like you're speaking to us. I said, yes, because I am.
Well, but that's great. So as we see here, you can see that he was an Egyptian priest for 3 or 4 lifetimes.
Several
and
times.
Then he was a woman one of the times that we know of. Now, let's first talk about this. I asked you this when I interviewed you on my show too. How this is pretty vulnerable. I mean, it's one thing for you to talk about all of this in a class that you have a controlled audience. They signed up to learn about past lives, but for you to write this book and put it out for everyone, what can you talk about that? Because I imagine that this was tough.
Yeah, it was tough. Well, first of all, I never thought I was going to be public about this stuff. Until I started talking about it, I think it was 4 years ago or so. So the memories have started 45 or whatever the years ago. It's 1977, whatever the math is. So a long time ago they started. And I would just talk to my friend George and a couple of very close friends, some of my family members. Obviously, my wives know, my kids know, and so forth. But very close knit group. And I would always tell them, just keep it to yourself. I don't want this to get out. It's like, it's just between me and you. And for me, it's like, why does anybody need to know? It's just for me to help me understand more about me. That's what, to me, self-development is. That's why we call it self-development. People forget the beginning word is self. Hello. So that's why these memories are useful for me. That's how I teach my students to look at them if they have memories. It's not about the memory. It's not about who you were or who you weren't. Most of my memories are of unknown people. There's only a few of them that they're historically known people, but most of them are unknown people, and it doesn't matter. It's what can I take away from them, those lifetimes that serve me today. But to answer your question about why I brought it, started talking about this several years ago, and then decided to write this book last year, or this year, actually, beginning of this year, is because I thought, maybe it can be useful for other people to inspire them to start opening up and being more vocal and verbal, and public is the word, public with other people about what their experiences are, whether they're past life memories or whether they're other spiritual experiences. I think it's good for us to share these experiences to make them more normal, because to me, these memories are normal. All the spiritual experiences, my communication with the other side that started in 1986, it's all normal to me. It's no big deal. I get it. It's not common for most people. But I think if we as a human race started talking, those of us who have had the experience start talking about more, I think we kind of normalize it and will allow other people to share their experiences, and also allow people who aren't sure if their experience was a past life memory or was a spiritual experience or was a communication with the other side to start opening themselves up to that possibility. And I've found in my own experience that has opened me up even more.
Yep.
Even the not knowing, no, I'm in the gray area, I'm not sure. Open up more, and then we can talk about some of the the data points, the corroborative data points in the book that you and I've discussed, that I talk about, that they came about because I started opening up more and to the possibility, without totally buying it yet, because I'm a skeptic, but I was opening up more to the possibility. Then I would get another breadcrumb.
Okay,
Right?
so you ended up being a lawyer, but you were in school and you were thinking that you were going science, medicine, that route.
Right.
So you have a discerning mind, a critical mind, and you're able to speak and debate. How did you accept? Because a scientific mind usually wants proof and wants data points and wants repeatable data. How did you, because hopefully you'll talk about some of these lives for us so people get excited to know more. But
Yeah.
how did you, you must have had some come in dreams, some come in meditation,
Yep.
some coincidences, which really, when we think of the big picture with the TM movement, wasn't a coincidence. Those people all enlisted to come in at the same time to do work to elevate humanity, right?
I think there's choices involved there. Yeah.
Okay. So could you talk about how, because many of the people that have had near-death experiences or I had spiritually transformative experiences, it's so disorienting, and you don't have words or ways to use the information.
Yeah,
So how did you, as a scientific mind, do
yeah.
that?
So I'll give you an example. So one example that illustrates a lot of the things that you're touching on here. So it was 1978, and so it was shortly after this initial experience I had, but within 6 months or so later, I was outside Chicago, meditating at some friend's house with a group of, maybe there's a half a dozen of us there. We had a group meditation, and we were lying down resting afterwards. And the way I teach meditation, if anybody's learned any other form of meditation, I suggest that you absolutely always have a rest period afterwards where you're just taking a 5, 10, 15-minute break at the end and just rest. You can lie down or sit or whatever, but you've stopped the meditation part and you're just sitting there with your eyes closed. So I was lying down. When I was lying down, this spontaneously happened. By the way, I've never had a past life regression at all. I don't need to. It just spontaneously happened to me. My mind, the TV screen goes on in my mind, and I see myself walking in. Well, I see through my mind's eye, what we call my mind's eye. I'm walking into a stone room, and it's just a big, huge stone floors, walls, ceilings. And I look up, and it's about 30, 40 foot high ceiling, whatever, big, way up there. And there's nobody in the room. And there's furniture's all pushed to the side, except one full-length mirror in the middle of the room. And I walk up to the full-length mirror. So I'll give you the short version of this because I want to cover the data point thing that you mentioned. So I walk up to the mirror. I see myself. I'm in crusader gear basically, and I'm a big guy. I don't know how big, but I'm big because I fill up the whole mirror, and I have reddish blondish hair, long red hair, and a reddish beard. Okay, so chainmail, the whole thing, crusader, the tunic, cross, the whole thing. So that's the short version of that. There's a lot more detail. I have energy rushes and all this other stuff. There's more detail of that story. But to give you the data points here, so that happened in 1978. Springish, 1978, that happened. And then I start having all kinds of memories of visions of being in battle. I'm on horseback. I start getting muscle memory. I can feel wielding a sword, what feels like on my shoulder carriage, my deltoids, my traps, my pecs, my lats, my bicep, my whole forearm, everything wielding a broadsword. And what that feels like going through, I'll just leave it at this, body parts on the battlefield. That's because I'm fighting. Okay, I'm on horseback. So that continues for a number of years. Many years later, and I don't know exactly because, as I told you, I didn't think I was going to ever talk about this. So if you ever have past life memories, I suggest you do what I did not do and write stuff down. So I'm not sure, but it happened sometime in the 1980s or late 80s, early 90s. I started having some knowingness about how big I was, how tall I was. I was 6'5", 230 pounds. Where does that come from? It just came it was a knowingness out of now I think my memory bank. But where did it come from at that? I don't know. It just 6'5", 230. I was a big guy. Okay. So now you have some data points. A crusader, reddish, blondish hair, red beard. And I'm leading the crusades. So for years and years, I see myself at the phalanx. I'm at the front of the hundreds, thousands of soldiers in the crusades, fighting the Muslims, okay, in the Middle East. Now I know I'm 6'5", 230 pounds. Okay. Another data point comes up later in around 2010. I remembered when that happened because I knew my daughter was in high school at the time. And I was meditating with her, and she reminded me of what happened when I was writing the book several months ago, she reminded me because she said, Daddy, you remember we were meditating together and you we're lying down resting and you were lying on the floor or something or whatever, like with two hands wielding a sword, yelling Saracens. And she said, and then I told you afterwards what happened because you didn't remember because I was just in the experience, I guess. And so she said, Daddy, this is what happened. And and then we didn't know what Saracens meant. So we looked it up. And Saracens is a term for Muslims. Muslims is a relatively new term. I think it was in the 1600s or something when the word Muslims was applied towards, to people who, Islam follows Muhammad and so forth. Before that, they were called Saracens. I didn't know that. Kelvin Chin didn't know that, but obviously a part of my soul's memory, we'll call it, knew that. That's another data point, right? And so, so we looked up, so then my friend George said, why don't you look up this guy and look him up and see how big he was and who he was. And so he said, look up Richard the Lionheart. Richard the Lionheart was 6'5", big guy, reddish blondish hair. Now, there's not very many redheads on planet Earth. I looked it up, 2% of the world's population. So, and how many redheads were 6'5" leading the Crusades? And Richard was known, unlike not all the Crusader leaders did this, but he was known not just in the Crusades, but in all of those battles throughout Europe, etc. He was always he wasn't just a strategist. He was known as a strategist, but he was a tactician, and he was always the first one into battle. And there's a story about Richard the Lionheart of him on horseback, because you got to understand, he was 230 pounds. You get another 100 pounds of armor and everything.
Wow.
Huge on a fort. The war horses were 1,400-pound war horses. Now a normal horse that you see is about 800 or 900 pounds.
Right.
So we would have two horses. We had an 800, 900-pound horse to generally ride on, but in battle you had a 1,400-pound horse, because an 800-pound horse with a 300 or 400-pound body on it ain't gonna work. And so I was so huge and the horse was so huge that there's a story of Richard in the front of his troops coming up in front of 200 Saracens, we call them Muslims now, but Saracens, soldiers, and they saw him and they turned around and ran away.
Wow.
They
Wow.
didn't want to fight. Now that didn't happen. I wish that happened all the time, but there was this one instance where that happened because they were so shocked the first time they saw him. He's so huge.
Wow. I love that. I haven't heard that story. I mean, I've read stuff, but I haven't heard that story before. So
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to chronology, and you have been, in many cases, a brilliant philosopher plus warrior.
Yeah.
You've been Simon Peter, Marcus Aurelius, Richard the Lionheart. You've been a Greek orator.
Yeah.
I can't even say the word. And then you've been a Tibetan monk. You've been Frederick the Great, and Sitting Bull. But what I wanted to suggest people, I want you all to read this book, because you'll be fascinated by all this. And then if you get to know Kelvin, you'll see these aspects of his personality that are highlighted in these people's lives. But I want to talk about this last life before this one, where you could have met your father.
Yeah.
You were a World War II fighter pilot, and your dad was he was a mechanic, right?
Yeah.
On airplanes in World War II.
Right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I was a World War II fighter pilot. I was born approximately around 1918-ish, something like that. And I died around-ish end of 1942, early 1943 is my guess. And the reason I can kind of triangulate, this is a teaching point for people, how I triangulate is looking at what do I remember and what was going on in the world at the time. Well, I remember flying F-4F Wildcats and even P-47s. I don't talk about that in my book, but because mainly I was flying F-4F Wildcats, but you trained on a lot of different aircraft. But I was primarily flying off aircraft carriers, so that's why I was flying F-4F Wildcats. Shortly after the F-4F came the Hellcats. After the Wildcats came the Hellcats, and they kicked butt in the Second World War big time with the Japanese Zeros. Whereas the F-4F Wildcats I was flying, we had to maneuver and we had to strategize and fly in a certain way that I remember. There's something called the Thatch weave and so forth. I don't need to get into the technical details of aeronautical maneuvers with you guys, but the point is, from a data point and a triangulation point, I died before the Hellcats. Otherwise, I would have been flying Hellcats. So that's how I figured out that, because the Hellcats came in around late 42, early 1943. So that's I had died around by then. Otherwise, I would have been flying Hellcats off of aircraft carriers. So anyway, that's a little teaching point. But that lifetime, yeah, who knows? I didn't run into my dad. My dad was on the land in the U.S. Army Air Corps. He was a mechanic for B-29s in India and then later in China. So bombing Japan, obviously, with B-29s. B-29s, for those of you who don't know, is the largest bomber in the Second World War. And it's the one that dropped the atom bomb twice. It's the B-29. So my father was one of the head mechanics. He wanted to be a pilot, but I think they discriminated. I think he was discriminated against because he was Asian, because he effectively knew how to fly a plane, even though he had never been in the pilot seat of a plane. He studied that when he was a kid growing up and so forth and so on. That's how much he wanted to be a pilot. But anyway, no, we never ran into each other. I died either on Guadalcanal or one of the island, in one of the battles there around Guadalcanal. But that's an interesting lifetime, because it illustrates one of the points that happened with me also with the Sitting Bull lifetime, which is I had memories of two different things that were very, very clear that didn't seem to go together. And I thought that, well, if I'm remembering this so clearly from this lifetime and this so clearly from what seems to be the same time period, how could I be, it can't be two people at the same time. It's just not, the soul does not split, And so with the fighter pilot lifetime, I remember flying and landing on aircraft carriers, taking off and landing, so forth. But I also had a very, very clear memory that popped up. So that memory of being an fighter pilot popped into my memory again in 1978. I had a flood of them. The door just opened up, doorway just opened up for me. And then I had, as I said, piecemeals of the memories over the decades added to them. But the one of the memory I'm talking about now of crawling through jungle brush and afraid for my life. All I had was a sidearm, pistol, and the Japanese were attacking us in the jungle. That to me confused me, and that memory started coming up in the 80s and maybe into the 90s, 1990s and 1980s, and it confused me because I remember flying off aircraft carriers. What did I get crash land in the jungle and whatever? That's possible, but that was not. It did not feel right when I asked myself that about did I crash land? No, I was there, and I was there two separate times, alive, not crashed. And so that was clear to me. So that confused me. But then later, I was watching a documentary, I want to say in, 2016, 2017, fairly recently, I'm watching a documentary on the Second World War on Netflix or something, and they talked about the Enterprise. Now, I remember the USS Enterprise that I was at least part of the time, I was stationed and flying on and off of the USS Enterprise in the South Pacific. I was blonde, blue eyes. I was a tall guy and pilot. And in the documentary, they talked about two of the elevators on the Enterprise getting bombed out by we call them Val dive bombers. Val is just a nickname that we, the Americans, Navy pilots, we used to call them Vals. And a couple of the Val Japanese dive bombers hit the USS Enterprise, and two of the three elevators that take the planes up and down were knocked out. And they only had one elevator working. So in this documentary, I learned that a number of the Enterprise pilots had to land on Guadalcanal during the battle because they couldn't, only a few pilots could land back at the Enterprise. If you're putting the fires out, you can't land when you're putting the fires out. Plus, when they even went to the fire out, only one of the elevators is working. That connected the dots for me. And I was on Guadalcanal flying. There was a bunch of us flying, which was called the Cactus Air Force. It was just a motley group of Navy pilots, Marine pilots, and some Army pilots who were just flying just to help protect the airfield. It was called Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, which was crucial for the advance of the US Navy and getting bombers closer to Japan, et cetera. So that's an example of how it may not appear to you to be right, your memories, and then all of a sudden, some piece of historical fact comes in and you go, oh, wow, it does make sense now.
Yeah. So I want you might have been with my dad. That's what's amazing. So out of all of your past lives, which one is your favorite?
Favorite, that people ask me that question. It's a tough question. I mean, the one that I learned the most from, I'll answer I'll give you two lifetimes. The one I learned the most from was my slave lifetime. Well, learned the most from is maybe wrong, but the one that affected me the most in my learning, that affected me the most, that affected me in this lifetime today, is my Carthaginian slave lifetime from 2,300 years ago, from around 300.
There's 250 BC.
Is that what it is? About 250?
Yeah, that's what it says.
Yeah, I looked it up, and so my memory of my book is like, not as
I've
good.
got the book. I'm cheating. If there's a pop quiz, I got the book right here.
Exactly. You give me the answers. Give me the answers. But it's the Carthaginian lifetime. Why? Because that was my most clear memory of the separation of my mind and my body. That my mind was separate and distinct from my body. I willed myself to stay alive when I was floating on a piece of wreckage in what we now know as the Mediterranean Sea. And that's the thing that struck me the most, that's helped me the most this lifetime. Why? Because, I've been laid off 5 times since I was 50 years old because my company, the company I'm working with, gets bought by another one. The law firm I'm working for gets merged with another one and whatever. And I'm out in the street and who knows what. And it's just, I got to recreate myself. My mind knew of how strong I was based on that lifetime from 2,300 years ago. I've used that to remind myself of how strong my mind can be if I focus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, my energies. Yeah.
I love that. I love the fact that you can actually consider the strength of one lifetime and use that to fortify this lifetime. That's one question I wanted to ask. I'm sure we're gonna probably do 15 more minutes and then start questions. Okay, 10 minutes, 15. But the question about your soul, I mean, I know because of my experience with you through Ions that you don't believe we die, that there's no fear of death. But how does the soul transfer that personality or those attributes some religions call that karma. How does all of that translate so that you learn and it's a compounded learning during this lifetime?
I think my experience anyway, and therefore my interpretation of my experience, is that these are imprints on our soul, what we call our, I sometimes just call it our mind, but people in this group will probably refer to it more as soul. I use the word mind in my teaching because sometimes I'm talking to people who don't have a spiritual background and they're not into spirituality, but we can use the word soul here. So I think that these are imprinted in our soul, these learnings, these teachings, these our personality traits, what we learn, what we remember, or what we can remember, and we don't remember all the time. That's where the rubber meets the road. How can people remember more of what they have learned in the past and then bring that into their present?
Right.
That's what this book is all about, really. It's
Right.
not about who I was and so forth. It's interesting. It's it's kind of curious and so forth. But the real teaching, the real learning is how I've been able to bring this stuff from, from lifetime to life to my present lifetime. And, I said this, I gave a talk at the Commonwealth Club in 2015, right actually before I had finished writing my first book on overcoming the fear of death. But I'd written enough that I had a structure for the book. Yeah, I had a structure for the book, and I gave a talk there at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. Those of you who don't know what this Commonwealth Club is, Google it. It's a famous place in San Francisco since 1903. Teddy Roosevelt, president of the United States at the time, did the opening speech. He did a speech at the opening of the Commonwealth Club in 1903. Anyway, I gave a talk there about overcoming the fear of death. In the green room afterwards, there were several media outlets, including Business Insider, which is why my websites get such a high ranking in Google, because Business Insider, the article they wrote about me in 2015. Anyway, the journalist asked me a question. I don't know what his question was. I don't remember what the question was, but this is an example of memory. It's so selective. I can remember some stuff from 2,000 years ago more clearly than I can remember from 2015. It's just the way our memories operate, right?
Yeah.
But he asked me something, and my answer, Kathy, was, people talk about having a bucket list. And it's like the bucket list for most people is what they want to do before they die. My bucket list, I came up with this completely on the spot in the green room when he asked me whatever he asked me. He said, my bucket list starts after I die, or at the moment I'm going to biologically die this lifetime as Kelvin Chin. My bucket list is I want to remember everything that happens. I remember some stuff, but I want to remember everything that happens on the other side, what I'm doing, who I'm with, this and that. I mean, I have smatterings of memories, but I want to remember everything, including all the way to making that choice to come back. Again, I have some memories of that, but I want to remember the whole flow of that. This is my bucket list. Choosing to come back in, and my next lifetime, remember everything that I now know about.
Wow. Yeah. So I think we're going to open it up now. The other thing I didn't mention that I do want people just to frame the information that's coming through is that Kelvin did have a near-death experience in his 20s, a swimming accident. So just so you know, he was, besides doing TM and besides he had some knock on the heads, I guess, to wake up, to remember. So, which I don't believe any of us need to have in order for us to do that. You don't have to hurt yourself physically in order to wake up. Thank goodness.
No.
So Noelle, why don't you come back and help us with the gallery? And Kel, I think there's a bunch of people that have cool questions to.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
There we go. So here's Noelle. Here's gallery.
Okay, I'm going to invite everyone to go ahead and turn on your video. And we do have some questions. And while people are turning on their video, I'll go ahead and read from Kimberly. She has a question. I heard from other who speak of past lives that typically we don't come right back. There is a significant gap of earthly time before we reincarnate. However, it seems like you came back pretty quickly after your lives. Can you speak your thoughts on this topic on when you come back? Also, have you identified people that have been with you multiple lives? Great question.
Yeah, the answer, the shorter, easy answer to the last part is yes. Many people I've been with other lives who this lifetime. So my daughter, my son, my ex-wife, my friends. So here, a whole bunch of people. In terms of the other question, I've come back. Yeah, you can do the math. You see, died in 1942, 43. I was born. I was conceived in 1950. I wasn't on the other side for very many Earth years. Other times I've been over there for longer times, and there's no rule on that. So here's the thing: when you hear people talk about rules, or they sound like rules, or they imply that everybody hangs out on the other side for a long time, and they imply that that's some sort of structural thing, that's part of the afterlife. No, we are souls. We are free will thinking souls in the universe. And I'm not just talking about here on planet Earth, because I talk about one of my lifetimes on another planet in my book also. So there are at least 8 billion human souls that we know about on planet Earth incarnated right now. And there are, I don't know, hundreds of millions, you would say quadrillions, I don't know what the number is, of other souls that are animals, okay? Because they have souls too. Let's be real here, okay? We, just humans aren't the only ones with souls. I get that there's people who believe that, but that's factually completely inaccurate. I've had many experiences, including literally the night before last, when my daughter's beloved cat died, and we were all there at his death, okay? And he came and visited us, my son and me, while we're sitting there on the couch when the vet took the body away, okay? So it's real, okay? Animals have souls, but we have free will. So you can choose to come back quickly as you want or not. That's the bottom line there, okay?
Well, I have to say, just us put a question in the chat, says, what is he doing wrong to keep coming back?
There's another classic mistake. You got all these, where that comes from? I think that belief comes from angels who are promoting this belief on the other side, that Earth is a school and it's a punishment place, and you got to come, and you got to come back, and you got to come back. And really, where we are, where we angels are, this is where everybody really who has their act together, like we do, we angels do. And I'm not picking on all angels, but there are groups of angels. And so there's groups of angels, just like there are groups of human beings, okay? There's not just one monolithic angelic thought process. They are minds. And I started communicating with some of them in 1986. So there's a diversity of angel thinking and beliefs, just like there's a diversity of human thinking and beliefs. And so I'm conjecturing that it's a group of angels. It could be a group of dead Buddhist gurus, okay? Dead Buddhist monks promoting that belief too. But whoever it is, it's that kind of thinking that, oh, you get punished, you got to come back, and this wheel of karma thing and so forth. That's a whole other discussion. We can have a 2-hour discussion on the wheel of karma myth, okay? And where that came from 10,000 years ago, okay? And where it came from, and how it's conflated and confused and then developed into this wheel of karma punishment thing. Now, so that's a belief system. So it's choice. We have free will. Nobody is making you come back. You can stay on the other side as long as you want or come back. I chose to come back because I'm into helping people and so forth and so on. And plus I came back, I talk about this in the book, Kathy, where I had this memory in February while I was writing the book, while I'm swimming, of being on the other side and looking down and looking at World War I and thinking about what's going on. And I decided to come back because I anticipated that it was going to blow up again. But I didn't know that it was going to be Germany and France and those countries. I thought it was going to be Germany and Russia, right? Based on my previous experience as Frederick II and my experience negotiating with Russia and what I saw happening before Germany surrendered. A lot of people don't realize Russia surrendered to Germany in the First World War. And they lost almost, I can't remember, I looked it up because I had this insight while I was swimming. Then I came back and I wasn't sure about what was going on. Then I looked it up. Then I looked up the history and I put the facts in the book about this. So whatever it says in the book is what I looked up and found. And because Russia surrendered to Germany before Germany lost World War I. Okay. But Russia was in such bad shape in terms of the treaty that they signed with Germany.
Wow.
Like 6 or 8 months before Germany surrendered, Russia was a mess. They lost like half of their GDP. They lost like a third of their population in World War I, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was crazy. So they were but my memories of my lifetime from the 1700s and negotiating and beating Russia, because I beat Russia. I was one of the predecessors. I was a Prussian king, right? So I was a predecessor of Germany, and I beat Russia, and I knew the hatred and the embarrassment, et cetera, et cetera. I thought this is going to blow up. So I didn't know. I thought it was going to be Russia and Germany in the Second World War primarily, and it was later. But I thought that,
Yeah. So Linda, is Linda Frank still here? If not, I'll read her message. But she asked, do you think that your soul has a theme through all your past lives? There she is. Do you want to ask you directly?
Well, I think you just did.
No, you can elaborate if you want.
Okay.
It's a good question.
Okay, so do you think that we do have a theme that runs through our soul in those past lives?
So you just changed the question. Okay. So for I'm going to answer the first question and I'll answer the second question because you just asked two questions, right? The first question was about me. And then the second question was about we. Two different questions.
Okay.
So for me, yes. For we, everybody, it depends on the person. So there is no absolute rules about anything related to the soul. There's no absolute rules. This is the part that, so one of the things that I have gleaned and that I've really, everybody read Robert Heinlein's book, Stranger in a Strange Land. I read that in this, in the 1960s. Anyway, he used the phrase grok, G-R-O-K, he makes up a word. It means like you really get your mind and your heart and your soul around it. You really get it now, okay?
Right.
Something that I finally really grok after 6,000 years is that we've been taking, this is my opinion, of course, a wrong approach to spirituality and for at least 6,000 years I'm aware of, you could go back probably longer than that, but by trying to get people to conform that there's a belief system that everybody should have, and here's the belief system. So like, here's the belief system that everybody comes back here for a reason. Everybody comes back here because of punishment. There's a belief system that everybody comes into life with a purpose, or everybody has a purpose that goes through all their lives. These are beliefs that people have, and it's okay. I'm not saying what's right and wrong about them. What's wrong, I think, is the approach that we've taken to say that my belief is the belief that everybody should espouse. And I tell my students, and Kathy, you've been in my class and you've heard me say this so many times to my students, don't believe everything Kelvin Chin is telling you either, because I want to teach you how to discern. What we don't know how to do as souls is to discern and decide for ourselves what makes sense for ourselves. Because if we start to do that, and if I can teach people do that, I've set them up for eternity to have a better, more happy, more contented, inwardly peaceful life, even if they forget all the content that I've said. So that goes to the point of free will. Does the person have free will? Yes. Free will means it depends, to answer your question, Linda, about everybody else. But yes, for me, yeah.
Okay, so that leads me to another question, which is, so when we have our past lives and we have these experiences, will you share what you've taken from the experience of remembering these past lives in terms of what has helped you to put these past life experiences together for you to remember them and to remember them easier? Because clearly, the more we can remember what we experience, the more we can evolve our souls, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the whole point.
Right.
So
exactly.
can you speak to that?
Yeah. So really I'll reframe what you're saying. What blocks us from remembering stuff, and what can we do about that to help us remember more? And the second part of your question was, I'm reframing, I think, you tell me if I'm right or wrong, so you can readjust, is how do you know when is right and wrong? You know, like, how do you know it's accurate or not? Basically, that's kind of two parts. That's what I got from that, okay? So the first part is fears, fear about death, all kinds of fears, fear of embarrassment, that kind of stuff. So I long ago gotten over that. So it's like, I don't really care what people think of me. I don't care. But a lot of people do. We know, and you can look inside yourself and ask yourself, but I'm not talking to you, Linda. I'm talking about anybody. But most people do. Most people do care about what other people. I really don't. It's like, I don't care. It's like, and so I've gotten over that long time ago. That doesn't mean that I don't care about people. I care a lot about people, but how they view me and their opinion of me, it's their opinion of me. And I'm okay with it, because I know who I am. And that's what matters, right? So I'm secure in myself. That's number one. That takes care of the fears. And I don't have fear of death, okay? So you get over those fears. But that takes care of the fear of embarrassment or how I'm perceived issue, okay? So then how do I know what is, accurate and what's not accurate? You never know for sure. So I accept that I have a strong acceptance. It happened like to me decades ago in not knowing everything for sure. Not knowing everything for sure. So you got to get over that. That's a big one for a lot of people. They want to know for sure. Yeah. No, the only things that are for sure, and I mentioned this in my book, are theorems. Theorems, if you know what theorem is from mathematics in high school, your theorem. There's a right and a wrong answer. There is a right or wrong. It's absolute. It's absolutely right or absolutely wrong. Mathematics has stuff that is, in other words, theorems is an example, but it has stuff where it's a right and a wrong. Okay. Life experience is open to interpretation, and interpretations are open to interpretations. And so my teaching to my students is, when you're talking about experience, which is what we're talking about, is look at the you have the experience. And then I go through in my book, I give like a filter, I talk about a filtration system that I come up with myself. And it just, without getting into all the details, the filtration, to answer your question is I look at emotional, how strong is it emotionally? I look at sensory, how strong is it, how many senses and how strong of the senses are involved. I'm talking about past life memories here now, can't remember. So, and then the last thing is third party corroboration. outside knowledge, like the Saracens thing. I didn't know Saracens. My daughter didn't know Saracens. We had to look it up. Okay, that's third part. Red hair, clear. Who had red? 6'5", 230 pounds. Clear memory, clear knowingness of that. Who is that? I don't know. Outside corroboration. Okay, things like Marcus Aurelius, knowingness. Frederick the Great. I had this experience. I knew I was a king of Prussia. I didn't know which king, but I knew I was a king of Prussia in 1979-ish, something. For decades, I just had this knowingness. It's like really stupid, like that. And I start seeing clothes, and then I could see like time, time period, but I didn't know which king until 2014. This is an example, Linda, of the third-party corroboration. Okay, of the first level of this one, the third-party corroboration is like it was 1999. I see the movie Gladiator. I knew it was Marcus Aurelius. There's something, and he's not in the movie very long if you know the movie, but I just knew it, just knowing this, and just started flooding me with memories. But then I think it was 2014. Kathy's the scribe here. She got the book, but I think it was 2014 or something like that. I had this connection between Frederick the Great and Marcus Aurelius. Why? Because I'm reading this book, which is over here, this book, 2-inch book about Marcus Aurelius, and he's talking in the Marcus Aurelius book, this biographer, about this guy in the 1700s who modeled his life after Marcus Aurelius. And he happened to be a king of Prussia. And I went, king of Prussia? Hold on a second. Who is this guy? And it turns out Frederick II modeled his life. So then I go and I follow the breadcrumbs. This is what I teach my students past life. Follow the breadcrumbs. I follow Frederick the Great. I read about Frederick the Great. And there's a whole separate chapter in the book about what I'm talking about. He not only just modeled his life, but he does all of this stuff about Greek philosophy, Roman this. He has his group. There's a group of 12. How many apostles were there, et cetera, et cetera. And he's a small group of 12 in the 1700s, and they get together and they have all these Roman names for each other. And they talk about, and he renames his castle Remusburg. People know about Romulus and Remus in ancient Rome, the story, et cetera, et cetera. And there's all this stuff. And I just got, Kathy, I didn't tell you this. I just got a text, a WhatsApp message from one of my Australian meditation students who went to Sanssouci, Frederick the Great's favorite palace in Prussia, and he was just there with his wife last week, and he sent me pictures, and I didn't know this because I haven't gone there yet to see the castle this lifetime, but he told me that there are about 6 or 8 or a dozen statues of Marcus Aurelius there. They don't, no place in any of the history books or Wikipedia online, they talk about that, because nobody's making the connection between the two except me, right? Nobody's making a connection. They just think, oh, he must be in it. I go, yeah, what's the big deal? He's got a whole bunch of different Roman people here, and there's a statue of Antoninus Pius there too. I've been trying to find out, because I had a knowingness, Kathy, that there was a statue of Antoninus Pius there, and I couldn't find any online corroboration of any, except he tells me that there is one there.
Wow.
Nobody's making the connection. Antoninus Pius was Marcus Aurelius's stepfather before. Now, why does Frederick the Great, 1600 years later, go out and have these statues there? All right. So that's part. Now, the other party corroboration, Linda, is this guy, William Baldridge. And I'll give you the short version of this story because there's a longer version in the book. But he wrote a letter. William Baldridge is a guy I didn't know until 3 years ago. He found me on Facebook. Why? Because we both used to teach TM in the 1970s. So he finds me on Facebook. Oh, Kelvin Chen, TM, blah, blah, blah. So he takes my Afterlife series where I talk about being Frederick the Great, Simon Peter, etc. He tells me on a private phone call after he takes my Afterlife series, after the reincarnation class, he calls me up and says, so you were the one who told Charlie Lutz about those lifetimes? I said, no, I didn't know Charlie Lutz. who's Charlie? I knew who he was, but I never talked to him. Charlie Lutz was one of the leaders of the TM organization, one of the first people who met Maharishi in 1959. And Charlie Lutz, evidently, this guy, William Baldridge, is telling me this 3 years ago, okay, 2020, that in 1973, a bunch of them on the West Coast, William Baldridge and a bunch of his friends would go down to Los Angeles and hear these spiritual talks given by Charlie Lutz. I already told you, I was in the science end of the TM organization. The spiritual organization, in the science end, we were teaching it in schools, trying to get in the schools over. The last thing we want is any association with spiritual stuff get into school system, okay? So we were told, we were instructed, I took it as an order, to not have anything to do with Charlie Lutz, of the spiritual side of the organization, I never heard any of his lectures. I knew who he was, but he was verboten, okay? from our side. We were the sports and education teachers. All right, so teaching sports teams in schools. So Widge is in this other group, and they're going down, and evidently he told me 3 years ago, somebody evidently in the audience asked Charlie Lutz, who was a very psychic guy, anybody on planet Earth who walked with Jesus? And he said, in fact, there's a TM teacher. This is 1973. There's a TM teacher who was St. Peter, and he also was the great military and strategist and politician, Frederick the Great, in a previous life. And William Baldridge thought that was crazy, because how could this military guy have been this, because he comes out, he was a Catholic, so he's William Baldridge comes out of this Catholic thinking, Christian Catholic thinking that, or maybe it was Episcopal, but close enough to Catholic, thinking that saints, how he's going to be a military leader, Well, interestingly enough, little did William Baldridge know about Charlie Lutz's history that I now know. I didn't know Charlie Lutz then, but now I know. He was the centurion at the foot of Jesus's cross when he was crucified, and he's the one who gave Jesus the sponge of water and poked him to see if he was dead, and he was dead. But before that, because Charlie Lutz was standing there for all those hours and hours and hours and hours at the foot of Jesus, Jesus gave Charlie Lutz a download of his teaching. Charlie Lutz was the first teacher of Jesus's teaching in Rome before I got there with my daughter.
Mm.
And Charlie Lutz has a military background. He was also Alexander the Great. He has a military. So I think I never talked to Charlie. Charlie died, in 2001 or something. I never have talked to him, but Charlie, I'm talking to you now. So I'm planting to see Charlie on the other side, that because my conjecture is that Charlie has this military background. He also had this Jesus teaching background, being the first teacher. He left, obviously, stopped being a Roman centurion, and he went to Rome, and he started teaching Jesus' teaching in Rome. He got there before Peter or Paul. Okay? And because of that, and because he has a military background, he didn't think anything of it that Peter was also Frederick the Great, like William Baldridge went. What? Again, third-party corroboration. That's the one that cemented it for me, Linda, because I've been doubting my whole experiences up until 2020, really, to be honest, right? Until Widge, okay. His nickname is Widge, William Baldridge. Until Widge we're friends now, right? Widge told me this 3 years ago, that Charlie Lutz said this, and then he checked with, I said, Widge, can you check with these other friends of yours who were actually in the room when they heard it? And he called them up in 2020, and they said, yep, and they remembered even more detail. So 1973, that happened. My first memories were 1977. And I didn't know the Frederick Great until 2014.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Did that answer your questions? There were a bunch in there. Questions, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question of resonating with what feels right to you.
Yeah.
And it's being able to validate what it is that you intuit
Yep.
in a way historically. And sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes you have these lives that are not documented. And so you can't prove anything. You can't corroborate them.
Let me give you an example of how I did that. Okay.
Mhm.
So my Carthaginian slave lifetime, I told you about already, 2,300 years ago. How do I know it's 2,300 years ago, or whatever it is, the math, 2250, whatever, First, I started having a memory of being of dying on a piece, almost dying on a piece of wreckage. Keyword almost, right? I willed myself to stay alive. That's all I saw, myself on a piece of wood, like the size of a door, like maybe a little bit bigger. And and then I started seeing, so I knew I was almost dying. I knew I was on I didn't know where, I didn't know when. And so then I see myself burning. I can start to feel now. Starting to get the sensory experiences. Okay, the motion. I got the sensory. I don't have any third party or external information yet, right? And then I start seeing the ships. Well, first I saw my skin. I'm very black. I'm very dark black. You see Norris, my good friend Norris here. Norris, I'm like twice as dark as you. You know that phrase? Africa, or for some Africans, they call blue black, right? That's how dark my black skin was that bluish hue almost. Okay, I could see myself on this piece of wreckage. Okay, all right, that's all I got for a long time. I don't know how long. 1979, this one popped in. 78, 79, this one popped in. But for many years. And then in sometime in the 1980s, I don't know exactly when. Again, I didn't write this stuff down because I didn't think I'd be talking about it. But I start seeing the ship. Oh, I'm rowing. Oh, I'm chained down. Okay, now I can identify this is not a wreckage from the 1700s or the 1800s or the 1600s. This is old, right? So now I know I'm rowing and I'm chained down. Well, I'm chained down. That must mean I'm a slave. Okay, now that's when I didn't, now I get the slave component in there. I'm rowing, I'm identifying time period now. Here's an interesting piece. So then I see, then I see fires and flames. Okay, now I know we got blown up. Okay, so probably throwing tar, something burning on, and the ship blows up or something, or whatever. It gets, comes apart. Probably got rammed, because that's what we're doing. We're rowing and we're ramming. Okay. But here's the interesting part, Linda, which is third party, that gave me a much more specific, because I didn't know I was Carthaginian. I had a knowingness, like you just said, the intuition, the knowingness I was Carthaginian slave. How do I know that? What's the corroboration of that? Here's a corroboration. So I see this thing coming down in one of these battle scenes, coming down from the enemy ship, and it comes down. It's like this ramp or something. It's kind of, it comes swinging down, boom, and it hooks onto our ship. So I go look that up, and there's something called, it's a corvus, I think is the Latin word, and I think it means raven or something, like a beak of a bird, and it comes out, and it's a brass thing or whatever it's made of, bronze, probably bronze, whatever, comes down and boom, and who made those? Romans. The Romans had those. The Roman Navy did that. Why did they do that? To equal the playing field. Why? Because the Carthaginians for hundreds of years ruled the Mediterranean. All the trade routes, Carthage, not Rome. Rome was much later. For hundreds of years, it was Carthage. Ruled, the Carthage Navy ruled, okay? Hannibal, Carthaginian Hannibal, I always grew up, thinking of him as a barbarian. That's a Roman view. They were barbarians, right? He was a Carthaginian general. He was the one who killed like 75 or 80,000 Romans in like a 3 or 4 hour period in a pincer move, the first recorded pincer move. Anyway, I digress. But the Carthaginian, so this corvus comes down. I see that, Linda, okay? When did that happen? It only happened in one of the Punic Wars. Now I'm narrowing it down to the Punic Wars. There were 3 Punic Wars. So now I narrowed down the time period, you see. But they only used the corvus during one of the Punic Wars. The third Punic War, I think. Yeah, the third Punic War. And they didn't use them after that. Because why? Because when the ramp comes down and hooks onto the Carthaginian ships, the Romans come over and they kick butt, because now it's just a land battle on the Mediterranean. It's not maneuvering ships around to ram each other. I mean, they did do that, but once you've got the corvettes down, you're close enough. Now it's equal to playing field, you see, because the Carthaginians, it's not aeronautical, but whatever they call it on ships, you know, their maneuverability was far surpassed the Romans. But the Romans did this corvus thing, had a ramp come down. That allowed them to beat the Carthaginians more in battle, and it allowed them to catch up. Then they didn't need it anymore, because now their naval maneuverability of their ships was equal or better than the Carthaginians. That's how I narrowed that down. You see that?
Yep, I do. So I don't want us to continue, because I know we're out of time, but I just wanted to thank you so much for answering that question.
Yeah, it's a great question. It really is. It's a good question.
Yeah, well, we'll have to do this again, because there are lots of questions that we couldn't get to, because
You know what we can do?
fascinating.
You know what we do next time? Just
What?
start with questions.
2 questions.
Okay,
Yeah.
Just do a Q&A.
Exactly.
Just do a
Okay.
Q&A.
okay, we'll do that.
Now,
Well,
you tell people beforehand, their homework is to read part of the book. You don't have to read the whole thing, but read part of the book. And then they come and we just pick up with the questions that you got. So keep track of the questions you have now and just start with them.
okay. Well, I just want to make sure that everyone knows how to find you and the best way to connect with you. So please share.
Yeah, the best way, just kelvinchin.org. My name, Kelvin. You got to make sure you put the L in there. kelvinchin.org. That's my main website. I have 4 websites. I have a book website, and I have Overcoming the Fear of Death website, and I got my meditation website. But just go to kelvinchin.org. That takes you to all of them. And it's my more spiritual website anyway. So for this audience, it's the more on point website. And then you go to my YouTube channel and subscribe. There's 150 now videos there and so forth, different playlists, etc. Yeah, check out the books.
Yeah, I feel like Vanna White.
I know the dancing book woman, Kathy Mason.
Well, because I love all of them, and you can see I've got Post-it notes in all of them. I mean,
Yeah,
this Marcus Aurelius book is awesome.
Yeah, that's
Write it
that's
down.
one that's 67 essays that I've written.
Yes, it's awesome.
I
mean,
don't say that I'm Marcus Aurelius in that book. So
No.
I hint at it, but I don't say it. And if you look at the back cover, if you get the ebook, you won't see this. But if you get the print book, you'll see on the back cover. You see in the back cover in the lower corner there, Kathy, right? The lower left corner there. You'll see a shadow of me in the very
oh,
Oh,
I never
so
saw
you're so
that.
photogenic, Kelvin.
You didn't see that, right? No,
No, I didn't see that, but I've
You
got
had more hair than,
no.
I've got the other one, a third one.
The one next to Frederick the Great.
yeah,
So that
Yeah.
Marcus Aurelius,
that
Frederick
one.
the Great,
Yeah,
and then
there we
right
go.
here,
There we go.
Kathy's finger is a
Yeah.
very, very faint that most people won't even see.
You can see that Kelvin is really able to answer questions and to make the work usable. And that's why I compliment him so much on the work that I've done with him. I've taken 2 classes and I've interviewed him. I guess this is my 3rd or 4th time because or 10.
Okay, so Kathy, next time, less compliments, more time for questions.
Oh, less compliments.
Exactly.
Oh,
Oh,
okay, I'll
Calvin
have to
knows I
just
love
call
him.
you and compliment you. Okay, well, thank you guys. Thank everyone for being here, and please share this because it really, the fear of death, I mean, we really need to see how we can be empowered at this time.
Now,
So
I'll leave you with this last thought. Overcoming the fear of death was the sole plan, purpose of Jesus and John the Baptist coming in that project. That
Amen.
was
Amen.